design. What are the new things that are exciting that you're seeing coming up as a concept or as a way of delivering better design that works? Because again, I apologize, I don't have a background in design, but from my outside point of view, I think that design should serve every purpose, right? Meaning that it should obviously align with the developers' costs and penciling. It should also be aesthetically pleasing for everyone in the community to enjoy, but even people that work and live and see the things that are being designed on a day-to-day basis also brings us joy, right? So I think it should serve all three. But what do you want to share as far as any new? Yeah, I know that's.
I think I loosely define this as a flight to value. And that sounds really highfalutin abstract language, but as we search for, especially, John, attainable housing solutions, I mean, the number of people in Los Angeles County who are severely stressed in their housing budgets is shameful, really. Yeah. And so I'm, somebody who's in the middle of that industry, I'm going, what can we do? And one of the things we can do is, and this is where I get kind of controversial, so bear with me, I try not to offend too many people, is it's redefining our perception of what housing is. When you are expected to produce 500,000 housing units in 8 years, that's from the governor, it's like, how do you do that, right? And you want to hit this value point? And so we begin to take hints, speaking of disruption, from fabrication, right? And how do they make things? The example I always like is this. What if you thought about your dwelling as a widget instead of as a home? And that gets controversial. If you decide that you're going to buy a nice piece of property in the Palisades and design your own custom home, well, that's a bespoke piece, right? That you invest in, and there's a lot of meaning and all this, right? When we need 500,000 housing units in 8 years, if we don't start thinking of housing as a commodity, how many of these I can roll off the line as quickly as possible, we will never, ever get there. And people find it very controversial that I could dare to think about a dwelling as a product and not as a home. But I think I'm willing to introduce the idea and go a couple of rounds with you, because I'm thinking if we don't start thinking about it like that, it's not going to happen.
I agree. I actually, it's not controversial to me. I think we're on the same page there. The only thing that I kind of see as far as, because we're kind of more on the city side with the land use and the zoning side, and obviously LA being, the fire department having a say in a lot of projects, rightfully so, right? Because I think safety is a big concern. So I would throw out, I think concept is essential to meet the housing demand in the future, right? To think of housing as a widget. And it doesn't mean that it can't be designed, it can't be functional. It could be everything, I think, given what's happening with modular builds and builds that we can bring here. But now, how do we get over the hurdle of safety in the cities kind of then conforming? I think they're starting to allow a few all steel modular builds. I think there's one project that I read about that's the first in LA that's kind of pushing that forward to give a comfort level to the city that these can get done safely at scale. So is really that going to be the key piece here, is that we have to have real life examples of this getting done, benefiting the community, it's safe, and it's cost effective to be able to launch more, right?
It's interesting. I don't think I've heard a lot of argument against the safety of a modular product. The point that you made, though, that I think is a good takeaway, it's very few people, John, will do something if there's not one to copy. Right? And so I know the guys, it's UAH. I can't remember exactly what that stands for. It's I can give him a shout out. It's Drew Ornstein and a couple of guys who are doing that first one. I think it's Modular in Hollywood. Then there's a smattering of other modular projects happening, and/or storage container reuse types of projects. And I will just tell you, human nature is such that I want to be the second guy in, or the third guy in. I am not a trailblazer. My investors can't take trailblazing. My wife can't take trailblazing.
Right.
So somebody else does it and let them take the hard knocks, and then we can say, oh yeah, well, yeah, that's not so bad, really. And because that's what I think is a big part of it. From a life safety perspective, I completely agree with you. And we people want to be safe, and they want to sense that they're safe in addition to actually being safe. And I think that the requirements, for the most part, that the fire department comes up with. LA, well, there's the debate over whether to change that one fire district in the city, change it all to fire district 1, which means you can't do wood. So it's like, really?
Yeah.
So it's the Palmer fire, John. It was the Palmer fire that made that a big issue. So of all the things I have on my radar that shape it, that's not one of the highest ones up there. But the perceived doability of something is extremely important. Boy, I tell you what, we open one of those things in Hollywood, there are going to be people lined up to come and visit it. And they're going to go, yeah, sure, of course we can do this. And then they move on to their second one and their third one. And if you're doing an offsite fabrication process, you get really good by the third one.
Got it.
And then hopefully you lay out other properties. You've designed, forgive me, you've designed the product, and it works. And even more important than that, people want it.
Right.
And that will open the floodgates. And then I go out and I have that 100-unit building or whatever it is. I don't change the units. I don't change it very much. I go boom, and then I build it somewhere else.
Right.
It was like a franchising of multifamily housing, right? It's like, when they rolled out a McDonald's or a In-N-Out or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in agreement. It's surprising to me that, like, let's just say I look at Singapore, right, and look at their housing department. Kind of, I understand that they might not be equally, or you can't compare them to here in the U.S., right, just based on kind of how they're structured with their government. But with that being aside, when I read about kind of how they're forward thinking and how they look at everything and just go with the best solution possible, right, without that kind of barrier of entry as far as no one wants to be the first to fail, right?
Yes.
Like they want to be the second and third successes. Again, with Tesla and like now GM rolling out and Ford rolling out with electric cars, it's like you always need that first to go out there. Totally.
Yeah. And there's, somebody goes out and falls on their sword is the first one. And then even sometimes happens. I mean, I don't think Tesla, that was the case, but for others, there certainly have been. Coda springs to mind, for example.